Humans have had, since time immemorial, the true instinctual urge to hunt megafauna. We loved it so much, in fact, that we hunted the whole lot of them to extinction. No more giant sloths, no more mammoths, all consumed by the superior beings we are, the true apex predator of this world. Thanks to modern gaming, we can now emulate this primal desire, be it in games like Shadow of the Colossus, Patapon, Dragon's Dogma, or the topic of today's video, Monster Hunter World, where you hunt monsters in the new world. So why not call it Monster Hunter New World, right? As one of my regular disclaimers, this is in fact my very first Monster Hunter game. I mainly played solo, and I did start with Iceborne activated from the start, without using any of the Defender gear, mind you. I say this mainly to paint how my experience with this game is framed, in case I say something that might sound weird to a series veteran or something. I went into this as a fresh-faced hunter, let's say. So why am I doing a video on this old-ass game now? Because of the whole Return to World campaign, which really caught my eye. I already had Monster Hunter World in my library because I picked it up on a deep sale, so I jumped in because the game seemed interesting, so I picked up Iceborne during the recent campaign on sale, and I have to say, I definitely wasn't disappointed. With the recent announcement of Monster Hunter Wilds, I am also now very interested in how this series will evolve, which I'll probably have more nuanced opinions on after I play Rise later this year. Since Monster Hunter World is a lot bigger than what I usually take a look at, you could even say the game is monstrous, this video will be fairly long, for which I do apologize. Also, for some reason, my OBS did not enjoy this game. It absolutely grinded my PC to a halt anytime I was recording Monster Hunter World specifically. So, if any of the footage looks choppy, it's definitely on my end and not the game's end. The game itself ran very well on my PC, so there's no complaints there. So in this video I will go over the general stuff like game premise, visuals, audio, gameplay and all of that stuff first, and then after that go chronologically through my experience with the game, from low rank to high rank and through Iceborne and Master rank, and mentioning specific game aspects and the like as we go through that. So without any further ado, let's hunt some monsters. In Monster Hunter World, you are part of the 5th Fleet of the Research Commission, a special body with the task of studying and researching monsters and monster behavior, with the 5th Fleet being the 5th expedition sent to the New World, a largely unexplored and unknown continent with, of course, a lot of unknown monsters on it. These expeditions to the New World specifically have the goal of figuring out what the Elder Crossing is about, the phenomenon of elder dragons making the trek across the ocean for an as of yet unknown purpose. An elder dragon being a classification of monster that largely defy the expected natural order and usually fuck shit up when they're around purely because of how powerful they are. You are currently tracking Zora Magdaros, a truly ginormous volcano-type elder dragon who starts to fuck shit up as you get closer to land. What a surprise. This is where the game starts after creating your character, with a pretty decent character creator to boot, as well as creating your little Palico buddy, which is a race of feline little helpers who will be your companion on your quest in the New World, and is also really cute. As you wash up on shore with your handler, you make your way to the previously established headquarters of the Commission, Astera, but not before being treated to some monster-on-monster action, giving you a little taste of what you're going to go up against and what you're in for throughout the game. That's essentially the initial story setup. Your main goal is tracking Zora Magdaros, which shouldn't be that hard considering its ginormous size, and of course trying to figure out the mystery of the Elder Crossing while doing so. But first you need to secure the headquarters, as the surrounding monsters are getting more and more frenzied due to the arrival of this elder dragon into the ecosystem. After introductions have been made and your equipment is equipped, you can run around Astera to explore and look at the different systems that are already here. These include the canteen, where you can eat amazing looking food for temporary buffs, the smithy, where you can eventually craft and upgrade better gear once you get the right materials for it, the researchers, who let you increase your knowledge level on every monster you encounter so you can get an idea how to fight them better and what materials they drop, the supply vendor to buy items, and the provisions team to turn in certain secondary objectives for some added rewards. Progressing through the story and by completing optional side quests, you do unlock more facilities and systems and expand a bit on existing ones, which range from being able to melt items from other items to having your own private cat task force to send out on their own quests to bring back basic monster loot, all the way to an RNG item generator in Iceborne. Firstly, on the visual front, the game can have some sort of blurriness to it. I later, much later, found out that this is due to the anti-aliasing which was on for me by default, which you can turn off of course, but then makes things look too sharp in my opinion, especially when you're wearing shiny weapons and armor. I suppose it's entirely a personal preference as to how you want your game to look of course, but after getting used to that initial blurriness, I really can't go without it anymore. There's a bunch of settings in general you might want to change by the way, such as showing you a silhouette of your character when it's obscured by something, like monster cheeks for example. Auto-sheathing your weapon was also a big no-no for me, as sheathing and unsheathing your weapon has a giant impact on your moves, speed, actions, etc. So if you were to start playing Monster Hunter World for yourself for the first time, I would definitely suggest looking up some quick start guides on what essential settings to adjust, just in general, as well as maybe a weapon guide or two after you've tried out a weapon a few times for yourself, just to get the basics right and stuff like that. In general, the game looks very nice, of course. Looking at some gameplay of older Monster Hunter titles, this seems to be by far the most realistic and detailed looking game of the entire franchise, with very dense foliage, extremely rich environments, vibrant color palettes, and amazingly interesting monster designs. For a game that turns 6 years old this year, it holds up very nicely in my opinion. Though I do recall some texture work being a little bit lesser here and there, though again very rarely noticed and a very minor issue if a single rock texture looks a bit off within a giant map. When you're out battling a monster and things get hectic though, for the most part everything stays clear, and I don't recall wanting something to be shown that I couldn't see during combat itself. Monsters, their attacks, their status are all very clearly conveyed in a visual manner, with a cool example being the steaming breaths of rage monsters have when they are, in fact, enraged. Outside of combat though, sometimes the visuals can get cluttered, thanks to your scout flies. These little buggers essentially just highlight everything that's interactable, be they gathering points, ammo to pick up for your slinger, or monster tracks to track. On top of that, they leave a trail to whichever target you're actively tracking or have marked on the map. This could make it a bit annoying to find one specific interactable when there's multiple highlighted on top of that giant path. But the issue is again a relatively small one and was fairly rare to come across as well. And you can always open and close your map to reset the trail or stop tracking something to mitigate the issue. The camera also did a fine job here, which is always a nice surprise when it comes to 3D action games like this, though it can depend on monster to monster basis whether you should use the targeting camera to track them or not. In general, I just moved my camera manually and that worked very well for basically the entire game, with some specific monsters being handy to use the target camera on, like a Tobikadachi for example, but the target camera had more downsides than upsides for me in general. All of the large monsters are a visual treat, and I absolutely love all of their unique designs. Well, maybe not literally all of them, but the vast majority, with their moves and attacks also being very cool to look at and all of them being very distinct. Your own attacks, depending on what weapon and what weapon type you use of course, also look great, with something like the longsword Spirit Helm Breaker being an absolute joy to see, a zero-sum discharge from the switch axe being very cool to see, knocking a monster on their ass, seeing sparks fly as you hit them with a blast weapon. All in all, very cool and very nice visuals. The game also does well on the audio front, which is to be expected of course, as any good hunter relies on sound, maybe even more than sight. Now with these monsters being so massive and you just gaining true sight over them as soon as you pick up enough of their tracks, it's not like you need to perk up your ears to actually find them or anything, but you can pick up a lot through sound cues alone. Usually these pair with the visuals to warn of certain attacks, but you won't be able to see the monster clearly all of the time if you're busy trying to hack off its tail or give it a concussion. The real star of the show here is, in my opinion, the music, with some absolute banger tracks that are unique per area, as well as unique for the more special monsters. Another very good part of the sound here is the roars and screams of these monsters, which usually signal a change in the fight and stop you in your tracks temporarily. These are very unique per monster and definitely have their intended effect of making you pay attention and or shit your pants. Monster Hunter World has 14 different weapons to choose from, each having their own niche and playstyle. The hammer is relatively slow but can do big damage and stunts easily. The longsword is nimble and has a lot of combos to it, but isn't easy to master. The greatsword is slow and heavy but hits like an absolute truck and is enormously satisfying to shoulder check a monster into the dirt. Stuff like that. I won't go into detail on every single weapon, because I simply don't have the experience with all of them, but there's a few things I'd like to mention in general. Combat has some similarities with fighting games, I feel, with a bunch of combos usually being present for your weapon and the ability to weave certain attacks through each other. There's also different attacks depending on different circumstances, like jumping attacks, sliding attacks, draw attacks. Some combos stop if you don't hit anything. Some attacks are different whether you're standing still or moving, stuff like that. Trying out some weapons for myself in the training area and in the field, and looking at some weapon guides online, shows me that there's definitely something here for everyone, whether you like ranged weapons, support weapons, heavy hitters or fast attacks. Combat also has obvious similarities to Souls-likes, though I suppose it might be the other way around actually. Most monsters have telegraphed attacks you can dodge roll through with invincibility frames. That's it. Monster Hunter World is now a Dark Souls title. In all seriousness, it's a very good action combat system, and when you're comparing it to a Souls-like, the comparison is definitely favorable for Monster Hunter World, as basically every monster you fight here is a boss fight in its own right, and we all know boss fights are the absolute peak of Souls-likes. Each weapon category also has its own array of different types, which you unlock through obtaining different crafting materials. These materials are then used to craft weapons that have characteristics and appearances related to those materials and their origin. A Puke Puke weapon will have poison buildup, for instance, as a Puke Puke uses poison itself. An Anjanath or Rathalos weapon will then do fire damage, a Tobi Kadachi weapon will do lightning damage. It all speaks for itself. There's entire weapon trees to build out here for each weapon category, so there's definitely something here for every monster and every playstyle. These concepts also apply to armor, with different armor sets providing different resistances to elemental attacks, as well as providing skills and set bonuses, which can range from improving your resilience and offensive power to specifically buffing a certain weapon or improving your quest rewards or gathering points. Better armor from tougher monsters also have more overall defense, which just lets you take less damage overall. Since every single new monster you encounter has its own gear set, or even two separate gear sets from high rank onwards, usually you're switching to new gear fairly often as you come across new monsters and materials to make some new gear with, as well as upgrade your weapons with. Those resistances I mentioned play a big role here too, with monsters who rely heavily on doing elemental damage being a lot easier to fight if you have a lot of resistance, with you becoming outright immune to the corresponding elemental blight if your resistance is high enough. Monsters also have their own elemental weaknesses and resistances, which you learn about at the same research level as their structural weak points, and this then also makes it easier or harder to fight certain monsters with certain elemental weapons. Those gear skills present on your armor by default can also be expanded on with set decorations, which are essentially skill gems you can slot into the gear that has the slots for it. These basically allow you to fill in the gaps of your build and allow for a huge array of customization options when it comes to playstyle, though obtaining those set decorations is very RNG heavy, with some deterministic options available at the melder later in the game, but it's not all of the set decorations that are available. So farming and hoping for that one specific decoration to complete your build can be annoying. Personally though, I absolutely love a progression system like this. You need to conquer a foe to use its materials to make weapons so you can conquer even stronger foes, with general ore and bones being found in the areas you hunt them. It obviously ties in very well thematically with the whole hunter aspect, and some of these weapons and armor sets look absolutely amazing as well. You can also gear up your little Palico bro, with their gear being a lot cheaper on the materials front, but still making a fairly big impact on their effectiveness in battle. Though they also have their own Palico gadget you can unlock more of, which determines their role in battle specifically. I genuinely can't think of a similar progression system in a game that does this feeling of progression and overcoming hurdles as well as this game does. And I assume the entire Monster Hunter franchise does so well as a whole. One caveat to the weapons themselves though is that not every weapon has as much depth to it as another, I feel. The hammer has nowhere near the complexity of something like a switch axe, for example. The greatsword is a lot easier to know what to do with than even a longsword, in my opinion. This isn't to say that getting the absolute maximum skill ceiling out of any weapon is easy by any stretch of the imagination, but there's definitely more complicated and more simple weapons. This isn't a bad thing necessarily either. It allows you to progress through these weapons as you want, and it allows new players like me to get comfortable with more simple weapons while getting used to the rest of what the game has to offer, with the option of trying out more advanced weapons as you go through the game. The basics of all weapons are relatively straightforward. Even if you can't hit a true charged slash reliably, you can still hunt monsters, especially in low rank, just fine. Even then, switching to a new weapon type is merely a question of having enough materials and money to make one, with handy checkpoints on specific weapon trees allowing you to get in at around your current power level, not necessarily needing you to upgrade from square one each time, which then would also take low rank, high rank and master rank materials, depending on to what point of the tree you're wanting to upgrade. Obviously, when you fight against fast and agile monsters with a slow and heavy weapon, you'll have a tougher time in general. But it's not like the game is unplayable without measuring out which weapons are best against which monsters or anything and playing to those strengths and weaknesses. You just have to put a little more thought into the fight itself. It's something I first felt with my first Odogaron encounter with the hammer, thinking to myself, how the fuck am I gonna beat up this quirked up white boy goated with the sauce with this slow ass hunk of steel? It turned out skibbity, of course, but it's part of the game you have to consider like any other. In general, this entire gearing system feels very well designed overall, and it's a lot of fun to try out some new weapons from time to time and switch gear sets around to spice things up for yourself and for the monsters. Arena quests especially are a cool way to try out new builds and weapons, as you have to face off against a monster with predetermined sets of gear, which allows you a little taste of what a weapon is capable of in a real-world scenario, instead of just hitting the training dummy all the time. So with all of that being said, what about the actual monster hunting? Hunting a monster is divided in two parts: the preparation for the hunt and the hunt itself. The preparation includes getting the right gear and a weapon for the monster or monsters you're targeting. If you're going after a monster that's weak against fire and does ice damage like a Legiana, you know what gear to bring. And you learn these weaknesses after getting that first research level on the monster, which usually translates in tracking it a bit and observing one. Though I do believe this scales up in high and master rank, needing you to find more tracks to go up a research level. The preparation also includes crafting and or buying consumables like healing potions in different strengths, buff items, ammo if you're using ranged weapons, traps if you plan on capturing the monster, ailment cures if the monster has those types of attacks, specifically crafted slinger ammo like flash pots and anything else you can think of when it comes to consumables. Finally, there's also the canteen with a rotation of fresh ingredients determining what buffs and how much of a health and stamina boost you get from eating some delicious anime tier food. Most of these things can be done while already out on the field, by the way, as you can access all of your items and gear and even the canteen at your camp. You can't switch out set decorations in the field though, so be sure to double check those before going out on your hunt. So, once you're actually out in the field on a quest, investigation or general expedition, either solo or with friends, the actual hunt can begin. So, let's say we're on a regular old investigation to hunt a Legiana, because I need some more materials for my Frosthammer upgrade. The first important choice is choosing which camp to start from, providing you have multiple established camps in the region, of course. I know from experience that a Legiana is usually found in the northern part of the map, so that's where I'll start, and look here. Instantly I'm finding some tracks right outside of camp. Once you find tracks of the monster you're after, it's just a question of finding enough until your scout flies do the work for you, but this can be a challenge depending on the monster itself. Flying monsters tend to, fly around, so losing their tracks is a real possibility. Also, if you're just looking in the wrong area, you probably just won't find any tracks at all. So tracking monsters on non-story quests can be an actual challenge if you don't know their habits yet. A little annoyance here is that, in the case of those flying monsters, they can often just get up and fly to another area altogether, just as you arrive at their current location. They usually travel between 2 or 3 main areas they frequent, and if your tracking level is high enough, you can see where they're going to go on the map, but having to turn back to go to the area you just were at, only for the monster to get up again to go back to where you just came from, can be a bit annoying sometimes, especially because it eats away at your time limit, even if it's only a little bit, and the time limit is usually very generous. So once you do finally track and find your target without it flying or running away instantly, the fun part begins. Battering the monster to death with your massively oversized weapon. In combat, you have a wide variety of options, determined in large part by the weapon you're carrying, of course. The insect glaive is insanely mobile and you can easily vault on a monster's back. The greatsword has very long charge times to get to its big hits, but if you time it right, you can knock a monster on its back in a swing or two, stuff like that. The arena you are fighting the monster in is also a large determiner here, with slopes to slide off of, giving you some great aerial options, same with ledges or walls to jump off of. There might be suspended boulders around the area to trap the monster under, or vine traps or any other environmental hazards to look out for. This Legiana usually retreats to her nest after taking enough damage, which has these geysers, which, when using a certain piece of equipment, propels you upward, allowing for some easy mounting damage. It's not all just trying to dodge and outsmack the monster like in Dark Souls. There's a lot of options available to you if you're actually looking for them. Aside from weapon and tool specific stuff to think about, like going for the head with a hammer, going for the tail with a switch axe, using your slinger to stun a Rathalos with a flash pod, or using the Iceborne clutch claw to grapple onto a monster and soften it up, or send it reeling into a wall, there's also monster specific stuff to worry about. At the start of the game, most large monsters are fairly straightforward though. The Great Jagras won't give you too much trouble as it just has fairly basic and predictable moves. A Paolumu though might give you more of a pause as it has 2 distinct forms and thus 2 distinct attack patterns and even 2 distinct weaknesses. In general, later and later monsters start being more and more challenging and complex, and this gets translated nicely through the overall vibe you get seeing these monsters for yourself. The first time I encountered a Diablos while hunting a Barreth made me run away, especially after it nearly one-shot me with a single charge attack. These apex monsters usually only come up in hunts after you've already reached the next area or are at the end of your current area. The Anjanath from the start, for example, you fight after you're ready to move on to the third area, I believe, with it stomping around the first area this entire time. And that Diablos you're only supposed to fight at the tail end of low rank as a whole. This then continues into high rank and master rank, with known monster types getting stronger and more varied movesets as well. There's also general tricks and tech you can use to optimize your combat prowess. The Clutch Claw especially allows for a lot of options aside from just your weapon attacks, which can be relatively limited sometimes. These optimizations can also be as simple as just realizing you can dodge roll through roars if you time it right, or realizing breaking monster parts can affect their behavior and attacks, though that one is mentioned a bit more explicitly. Even when you've tracked down and are fighting a monster, there's no guarantee that it's the only one around, by the way. Depending on what else is roaming around on the map and where exactly you're fighting, sometimes another monster will just waltz in and join in on the brawl. In one of the coolest cases, this can result in a turf war, where both monsters square off against each other in a unique animation that sees one of them the winner, dealing a ton of damage to the weaker monster, and it usually scampering off, or both taking heavy damage in a draw. These are a real sight to behold and also allow you a little breathing room to maybe heal up and sharpen your weapon. There's another turf war between every monster though. Sometimes the other monster just starts attacking you or the other monster as well, which can make the encounter quite a bit more chaotic. Though, like regular one-on-one fights, these don't last forever, and either monster can just decide to leave whenever they want. You can always try running away yourself, of course, but often a monster will simply keep chasing you if it's mad enough, though there's always the dung pod to scare some monsters away, or donning the ghillie mantle and stealthing away that way. You're not locked in until either you or the monster dies, that is to say. These breaks in fighting in general are good to have too, by the way, as they allow you to reassess and even resupply if you want to go back to camp, with the monster usually trying to find a place to rest or a meal to eat. Supposedly, they do start recovering a little bit of health if they do start eating or sleeping, but whenever they start limping back to their nest, it's usually a signal that the hunt is almost over and that, should you wish to capture the monster, now is the time to lay out some traps and get your tranquilizer stuff ready. Another thing to keep in mind during combat, and for which these little pauses are great, is your sharpness in case you're playing with melee weapons. Sharpness can be influenced by a lot of things, but in combat it usually goes down steadily as you hit your attacks. If it drops below certain thresholds, your attacks will do less damage or even bounce off the monster entirely, as the part you're hitting is too tough for your dull weapon to go through. You do have an infinite whetstone to sharpen your weapon with whenever you want, but it's a precious few seconds you might not have during combat, and you need to let the animation finish to actually sharpen your weapon. Though even here there's a lot of ways to approach this, by having a skill that shortens the time needed to sharpen, lower the rate your sharpness drops, make it so even blunt weapons don't bounce off with yet another skill. There are, just like with most aspects to the combat in this game, a lot of different ways to approach a single problem, and this freedom in general really makes this game feel like a lot of fun to go through and explore all of your different options. In general, there's a lot of details to how the monsters behave in certain situations. All monsters get tired over time, as you damage them and as they try to attack you, which allows for some lulls in the fighting without you or the monster actually leaving. This is an opportunity to either gather yourself or exploit the moment for big damage. Monsters also get enraged as a fight goes on, which makes it immune to wall banging with the Clutch Claw, as well as beef up some of their attacks. Some attacks also seem unique to a monster being enraged, and there's definitely different attack patterns to keep in mind. Other details here include blinding a monster with a flash pot, making it actually act blind, firing off attacks in random directions, and, like I mentioned, breaking parts having effects on the efficacy of certain attacks, with some specific moves actually leaving the monster stunned for a while. If a Radoban does a specific move without enough bones, a flying monster tries something with broken wings, or a Tsitsiyaku being sad when it realizes its flashbang doesn't work anymore. In general, while just on paper hitting a monster in the head with a hammer a few times might sound simple, there are a lot of nuances to be found here. Though most of it is optional, of course. Optional in the sense that you don't have to exploit a monster's weakness or utilize their unique mechanics. You can face your first Anjanath with a -10 fire set, but I wouldn't recommend it. There's enough videos around on YouTube with people beating the entire game without ever equipping a single piece of armor, ever upgrading their weapons, or even without getting hit a single time. But I'll definitely say that the combat is a lot of fun in this game if you engage with it a bit, and maybe switch between a few weapons from time to time. For me personally, starting with the hammer, going into high rank, I started to get bored of it for a while and branched out to some longsword and switch axe action, though I chose to stick with my trusty hammer for the most part and went through master rank with my hammer as my main weapon. And even though you can't cut off tails with a hammer, stunning a monster like 2 or 3 times in a row by spamming big bangs on its big head while breaking off its horns is a lot of fun, and doing the slope spinny move always made me happy. That isn't to say that the combat is perfect though, of course. There's some general annoyances like most third-person action combat games have, like hitboxes feeling a bit fucked up sometimes, getting stuck against the wall by the more unique attacks some elder dragons have, getting stun-locked into certain death, or just whiffing some attacks when the monster decides to move slightly to the right all of a sudden, monsters spamming an annoying attack, and in the case of us based melee weapon users, monsters just getting out of reach in general. Obviously, I don't expect a monster to just sit there like a punching bag, but chasing after one only for it to just dash the other way can be a bit silly and annoying from time to time, especially when they do it 4 times in a row. Rathian. Much like in other games with similar combat, when these annoyances do happen, even if rarely, it can feel like shit in that moment. But as long as it does happen rarely, it's not that big of a deal in the end. In general, the entire game feels very good to play and very well put together, and the combat is an absolute joy to fight in 90 to 95% of the time. But as is typically human, that annoying 5% stands out a lot more, just by virtue of it being annoying and a negative experience. 90 to 95% is still an amazingly great score to get, of course, and I genuinely loved the combat for the vast majority of my time with the game, but those little annoyances and little negative experiences, even if they don't detract from the game as a whole, are still worth mentioning, I feel. When it comes to the story and general progression, I'll start at the beginning, of course, which is low rank. Low rank essentially encapsulates the entire Zora Magdaros arc, with low rank ending at the conclusion of the arc, of course. In essence, it's one big story chapter which has some clues and unresolved questions by the end, which then leads into high rank. So to recap, you arrive in the new world to track a giant elder dragon and figure out why these elder dragons are making the elder crossing here in the first place. You start out in the ancient forest to gear up and defend the base from the now agitated wildlife that are riled up by Zora Magdaros arriving here. You then move to the Wildspire Waste, which is a completely different environment of desert, oasis and swamp, which is in stark contrast to the lush jungle of the previous area. As you continue to track and fight Zora Magdaros and the other monsters, eventually a big plan gets hatched of stopping and capturing the Elder Dragon in its tracks. These Zora fight quests are quite different than normal hunting quests, as the guy is obviously way too big to fight conventionally. So it mainly consists of you running around, breaking magma cores on its back and shelling it with ballista and cannon fire from afar. I didn't really enjoy these quests, but there's only 2 of them in the entire story, so it's fine, I guess. A mysterious new monster also appears halfway through these quests, known as Nergigante, who then completely beats my ass and then gets driven off, with Zora Magdaros just walking through the barricades that were meant to stop it in its tracks, all the way to the other side of the Great Ravine. You eventually make it to the other side there as well, and this new third area absolutely blew my socks off. The way they managed to transport the visuals of a coral reef to an area on land is absolutely amazing, and the creatures and monsters here are also more alien as a result. This continues into the Rotten Vale, with a more dark and brutal undertone and spikier monsters. All in all, this gives you in total 4 areas to explore and 16 monsters to encounter and hunt in low rank. At the start of the game, I initially wrote down in my notes that depending on monster variety, it might start to become tedious and repetitive. But with the wide variety in monster type, behavior, combat, visuals and the like, this certainly wasn't a problem in low rank, with high rank and especially master rank even feeling like it has too much variety at points. The process and initial excitement of getting to a new area and finding new crafting materials, slaying new monsters for new monster materials, unlocking another part of the weapon tree, unlocking new armor sets, this stuff never got old, and even at the end of the story of low rank and even at the end of the story of high rank, I hadn't gotten the best gear sets or weapons in full, not even close. I think we can consider low rank to be a very decent ramp up and introduction to Monster Hunter in general, with high rank being the point where the difficulty starts going up a bit more noticeably. Right after the whole Zora Magdaros and Elder Crossing mystery gets solved, you go on an expedition to the Wildspire Waste to investigate some strange monster sightings, like a Puke Puke in a biome it's not found in usually. This Puke Puke is also a lot tougher than normal and also has some new moves. Aside from that, there's also new materials to find at ore deposits and bone piles for new and better gear, with the Puke Puke also dropping new and better materials, as well as a strange track to be found belonging to a strange Rathian. Getting back to base with these newfound materials and newfound information unlocks a ton of new armor sets, all being essentially upgrades to their existing low rank versions, as well as unlocking more of the weapon tree, with cooler and more unique looking named weapons making an introduction here. The general introduction into high rank is relatively slow, with it teasing you with these new, stronger variations of the known monsters from low rank and sending you on expeditions to gather tracks of this mystery Rathian, to kind of force you into exploring high rank before facing something new. Monsters in high rank start dropping high rank materials, which are different from low rank materials, and this difference is an ingenious way of allowing you to keep advancing your gear while still fighting recycled monsters, so to speak. This special Rathian you're tracking turns out to be a pink Rathian, a more aggressive subspecies of the regular ones, and this, for me, was the first real hurdle to get over in essentially the entire game up to this point. Mainly because the local monsters didn't leave me alone on this hunt, and the faster moves of this pink Rathian didn't really help my slow hammer bonks to find their mark. I also didn't have any real hard mode gear equipped yet, as I got a bit attached to my Legiana set, but after farming out some actual good gear, encountering some new monsters along the way, like a Kirin, and a surprise appearance of a Basil Juice, I managed to make my first real high rank kill. After this proper introduction into what high rank will be like, the Admiral returns to camp with tales and treasure of some newly revealed area after the whole Zora Magdaros thing went down. This then leads into the final new area of the base game, Elder's Recess, the place where Nergigante is hiding out in. As always, gathering new materials, discovering and fighting new monsters, and tracking Nergigante are the things to do here. And here is where I really realized that low rank is essentially just the tutorial. These high rank exclusive monsters, like the Pink Rathian before, and in Elder's Recess the Dodogama, the lava variant of a Juratodus, and a explosive variant of the Radoban, gave me all a real run for my money. Around the same time as all of this, you'll also get some side quests to go kill all of the other high rank monsters, which will definitely clutter your armor crafting list when you've hunted all of them. You'll also get some quests to fight some new monsters, like the aforementioned Basilgeuse, who I already had the pleasure of meeting earlier, and the Devil Joe, which is one mean motherfucker. The start of high rank definitely starts to give you a lot more options in terms of skills on your armor, mainly due to the addition of decoration slots, which I've already explained. These make it possible to really start hashing out some actual good builds instead of just relying on what your gear gives you. The whole gearing process in general also seems to be a little bit more grindy here in high rank, where for even one piece of gear you will likely have to hunt the same monster twice, unless you get lucky with your shiny drops or your carves, instead of hunting the same monster twice for the entire set, like in low rank. This also scales up further in master rank, and the higher tier weapons and armor sets start requiring rarer and rarer materials as well. At the end of high rank, I was farming out elder dragons for their gems, for example, which I ended up just melding anyways because they didn't want to drop after 10 kills. A tiny bit of an annoying aspect here is that, should you want to switch to a specific weapon tree, you might have to craft low rank versions first, which will require low rank materials, which will require hunting low rank monsters. Once you start getting some high rank gear together, these low rank monsters cease to be any real challenge and can turn into a little power fantasy, so it's really no big deal. But this also continues into master rank, where you might need high rank material for specific stuff, which at that point don't pose any real threat to you either, so it's more busy work than anything else. You also get the ability to send out a Palico Safari at some point after reaching the Rotten Vale, I believe. And this band of Meowster Slayers will go on a few quests of your choosing and bring back some basic materials. It's just basic materials, but it's better than nothing at least. Same with the Argosy ship that starts doing supply runs, but these are very random, so if you really need a new elemental weapon, with low rank Anjanath materials for example, the fastest way is to just go kill an Anjanath yourself in low rank, which takes like 5 to 10 minutes max at that point. It can also be considered a good training exercise for the new weapon you're wanting to craft, however, getting used to the new moveset by killing those low rank monsters with your brand new Switch Axe Rarity 2, for example. Though a lot of weapons are also downgradable, refunding you all of your materials, so in essence, switching around is really not that big of a slog as you might expect from similar games, and it's very feasible to have multiple builds running concurrently, especially if you spread out the weapon trees across different weapon types, like having a lightning hammer, a fire greatsword and a poison switch axe or something. Anyways, after doing a few expeditions out in the Elder's Recess and getting geared up enough in high rank, it is now Nergigante time. After tracking him down and getting the quest to kill him, it's time to face off against this fucker that's been teased since essentially the Juratodus fight in low rank. After obtaining my piece of Basilgeuse armor after a grueling investigation where an Azure Rathlos stole the show, I was ready to kill the Elder Dragon Killer. He's quite the beefy guy, regenerating broken parts of his body as the fight goes on, and when he inevitably retreats to his nest, he seemingly becomes even more dangerous there. After the kill, the rest of high rank opens up into the search for the other Elder Dragons. Since they all scattered with Nergigante coming to eat them, you now have to track down 3 different Elder Dragons across 3 different areas to progress. This process is also a little grindy, and I've heard it getting mentioned multiple times watching Monster Hunter World Challenge runs and the like, with tracking down these elusive monsters like that Pink Rathian for example, and now these 3 Elder Dragons, taking a few quests or expeditions to actually reach the required research level to pin them down. This is of course a good excuse to farm out some more gear, but if you want to get going, it can be a bit of an annoying roadblock. As I went through these investigations, I also unlocked the last few Palico gadgets I hadn't yet. These play a very big role in what kind of support your Palico can actually give you in combat, with perhaps the most useful one being the Choral Orchestra, with which your Palico turns into a little hunting horn enjoyer, providing you with similar buffs to the real hunting horn. These gadgets, while they're all very handy to have, can vary in usefulness, though it really depends on what you're going for, but your Palico can definitely come in clutch at the right moment, and I would have failed a lot more hunts if it weren't for this little guy. High rank starts introducing subspecies with the Pink Rathian, but I didn't actually run across any other subspecies while doing the investigations, aside from that Azure Rathalos during some Elder's Recess ones. I've seen a Black Diablos pop up in an optional quest though, but aside from those, I mainly just focused on grinding out some Nergigante gear so I could stand an actual chance against the 3 Elders, with the Nergigante weapon having high Elder Seal, which seals away some of the unique Elder Dragon powers they possess. These 3 Elder Dragons are Kushala Deora, a dragon with a body of steel who controls the wind, Teostra, a regal dragon reminiscent of Babylonian statues of winged lions, who controls fire, and Valhazak, a seemingly undead dragon who controls the effluvium in the Rotten Vale and has a bit of a fish-like appearance once you seal away its effluvium generating ability. These Elder Dragons are, expectedly, a step up above the normal monsters. They all have some kind of aura related to their element, which makes it dangerous to stay too close for too long, especially when they're enraged and as the fight goes on. Teostra cloaks himself in fire, Kushala Deora in wind, and Valhazak in effluvium. This is why you bring Elder Seal weapons to these fights, to try and reduce these Elder Dragon's special abilities. But even then, these Elder Dragons will show you why they are so special and worthy of the classification of Elder Dragon in the first place, and these were probably the most enjoyable and challenging fights in the entire base game for me. When you, inevitably, defeat all 3 Elders, the story reaches its final conclusion. At last, we get to the whole point of all of that bioenergy and the Elder Crossing and whatnot. The energy was required by a new life form which is incubating here. It births as you confront it, and this creature, who will later be known as Xenojiva, is absolutely massive. Compared to all of the monsters you have fought up to this point, this one feels like it's on an entirely new level. Aside from Zora Magdaros, I guess, when it comes to size, but you fight Xenojiva the same way as all of the other monsters. I think this fight was pretty cool overall. The design of Xenojiva is very interesting, having quite the alien-like appearance, having some glowing and semi-transparent body parts. This can also be attributed to the fact it's essentially a newborn baby, but don't let that fool you. Xenojiva is out for your blood, and this fight was definitely the longest one I had in the game up to this point. I also did enjoy the fight for what it was in general, but the issue with Xeno being this big is that it gets kind of annoying to effectively fight it. It'll cross the entire arena in a few seconds, and by the time you can catch up, it'll already be firing lasers or running the other way again, making it a bit tiresome to fight with short-range melee weapons, which in my case was the hammer. Aside from that, this was a very cool fight and a real spectacle, and the story of base game Monster Hunter World ends here, with the research commission having finished its objective, but the expedition itself staying here to continue researching this still largely unexplored continent. This then opens up a bunch of new side quests, like the Witcher and Final Fantasy XIV crossover events and other special encounters, as well as opening up the possibility to start Iceborne. Obviously, when the game first launched all the way back in 2018, this was the endgame, where you would then farm out high-rank monsters, the subspecies, and the Elder Dragons for their gear sets and whatnot, and challenging yourself even further with tempered and arch-tempered monsters for their special sauce. But we don't have time for this. I spent too much time in the pre-Iceborne endgame for no good reason already. I was hell-bent on getting my final Nergigante hammer upgrade, as well as the set bonus of Valhazak. Turns out that the drop rate of materials you want is inversely proportional to how much you want them. Thankfully, I eventually got to melt a Nergigante gem after getting a side quest chain reward, and Valhazak wasn't that hard to kill a few times if you have gear that practically nullifies his Effluvium stuff, of course. In any case, after killing Xeno'jiiva and all the pre-Iceborne endgame opens up, you are almost instantly invited into Iceborne, provided you have the DLC, of course. With the catalyst being some Legianas that seem to migrate to the east for no obvious reason. The Research Commission, being bored out of their mind at this point of course, have nothing better to do than to follow the Legiana. This way, you arrive in a new land, Canada. This icy area is home to new mysteries and monsters, but more importantly, new materials. After unlocking Master Rank and starting Iceborne properly, the last part of the weapon upgrade tree gets revealed. And once you defeat your first Iceborne monster, the icy cousin of the Juratodas called Beotodus, the first few sets of Master Rank armor are available to you as well, just like it was at the start of High Rank. As expected, perhaps, these starting Master Rank sets completely blow the endgame High Rank gear out of the water. This too is similarly handled in MMOs, which Monster Hunter World seems to have a lot in common with, aside from the actual multiplayer aspect of course, where whenever a new expansion drops, the starting gear of a new expansion usually makes the endgame raiding gear of the previous expansion completely obsolete. So we have now officially entered Master Rank, and after touring Celiana, the new forward operating base, we are free to explore this new land to our heart's content. With the overarching mystery of the Legiana migration, the dragon that was seemingly hunting them, as well as whatever your special handler is up to looming overhead. Hoarfrost Reach, the new area, having the "it's cold here so you need a hot drink" is a bit strange as it's the entire zone, making it just an annoyance for no real reason, I think. Effluvium is worse, but that doesn't cover the entire area of the Rotten Vale, and Elder's Recess also has a hot area, but that's separated from the rest as well, so it's more forgivable than the entire zone, but whatever. The buff lasts quite long anyways, so it's not like you have to constantly chug hot drinks during combat or anything, and you can always sacrifice a decoration slot to nullify it completely. The snow physics, visuals and sound are all pretty good here, with the new unique monsters found here all being of some sort of ice or snow adaptation of relatively familiar faces. The Beotodus is just a Juratodas but adapted for swimming through the snow itself, using its sharp horn to skewer prey by burrowing up to them, as we can see with the turf war it has with a Banbarrow. The Banbarrow itself feels like a variation of the Barioth, which has adapted to this snowy and cold environment, using its massive horns to just uproot entire fucking trees and throw them at its enemies. These two, being relatively familiar to fight, serves as a nice and smooth introduction into Iceborne proper, with some of the unique monsters you encounter during your adventures in Master Rank being absolutely insane to fight. So, coming back to some old friends like beating a great Jagras to death after getting mauled to death by a Tigrex can serve as quite effective therapy. Low and high rank monsters feel different in Master Rank, just like how low rank monsters feel different in high rank. Thankfully, it's not just the upped health and damage to pose an actual challenge for Master Rank gear, but they also have expanded moves and behaviors. Although Garon are permanently frenzied, for example, and the monsters are just more aggressive in general, I feel. They also get diminishing returns when it comes to flash bugs, meaning it's harder to stunlock the monster instead of the other way around. It also seemed to me, though this may just be more outspoken in Master Rank as the fights generally last longer due to the larger health pools, but the monsters also seem to gain diminishing returns on being knocked down, with them just getting up a lot quicker if it's the second or third time they've been knocked down in like 5 minutes. In general, Master Rank just feels more challenging, both in known monsters and in new ones. And there's a lot of new ones, mainly found in new subspecies as well as variant monsters, but also just new monsters entirely. Well, new monsters that weren't in the base game, of course. I'm not too well versed on which monsters exactly were present in previous games and which ones are entirely new faces in the series. On your quest to find out what exactly is going on in this new land, and why the Legiana migrated here in the first place, there's a lot of back and forth between this new area and the old ones. Hunt a new monster here, go back to Astera to hunt a new subspecies there. Go on an expedition to track Velkhana, the new poster boy elder dragon, and meet a new variant monster along the way. Just the amount of variation here is very nice, with no annoying escort or siege quests, with the one Velkhana fight feeling more like an aided regular fight than a Zora Magdaros one. All these new monsters also bring with them new materials, of course, with an absolute ton of gear sets and weaponry expansions in Iceborne. I don't know the exact number, but it felt to me like Iceborne has at least as much stuff to it as high rank, probably a lot more if you count the endgame and patches that were added to Iceborne over the years. Just in general content-wise, there's an absolute truckload of stuff to do. On my way to Velkhana, I'd barely even touched the optional quests or investigations, and even then, there's just so much new stuff thrown at you. What I also started noticing in Master Rank especially, is that all of these monsters are, in the end, just animals. Well, for the most part at least. Facing off against the Tigrex for the first time had me absolutely shitting my pants. A flying dinosaur on steroids. Fuck me. But then it starts wearing itself out a bit. You topple it once or twice, you blind it with a flash bug, and then it starts tiring out, having to catch its breath between attacks, getting worn down until it roars, leaves, and starts limping. And you know it's all going to plan. Just the general game feel of it, which goes for the entire game, mind you, but this just stood out a lot more in Master Rank, of facing off against the true force of nature and overcoming it, is just so much fun. Especially once you start getting a new monster's moves down and find more openings. Realize which body parts are the weakest, which moves can be exploited, getting your dodge timings down. In that way, it is of course a lot like Dark Souls, with every monster being a boss fight in its own right, like I said at the start of the video. Even at the very start of the game, encountering a Kulu-Yaku for the first time filled me with that adrenaline during the fight, you know, and I feel the game largely excels at that feeling of excitement and discovery and challenge and overcoming that challenge. It does a very, very good job at it, I feel. As I continued to make my way through Iceborne and finally managed to beat the ice off of Velkhana after upgrading and refining my build and strategy after getting shafted by her a few times, I assumed the ending was close by. But, similar to Base World, after beating the shit out of the poster boy Elder Dragon and stripping its body for parts, more Elder Dragons show up. In Master Rank, it's a Valhazak variant and a new one, Namiel, who somehow gets to use both water and lightning. A very cool design though, making a dragon look like a deep sea creature is an impressive feat for sure. After these investigations conclude and these new Elder Dragons have been hunted, it is finally time to face off against the old Everworm, the being that's been responsible for everything that happened in Iceborne. With a sinister Nergigante appearing here too, serving as the appetizer before the actual big fight, even though he bodied me a fair few times because, well, it's a souped up version of regular Nergigante. Even though Nergigante was my most hunted Elder Dragon at that point, he's still an absolute powerhouse. So after putting this Ruiner Nergigante down, it's finally time to face off against Shara Ishvalda, the old Everworm. This motherfucker starts out as a literal rock, with the fight itself being fairly similar to that of Xeno'jiiva, a slow, big monster that hits like a truck. Though Shara has two distinct phases, one with rocks and one without them. I didn't expect it to have a seismic laser cannon and it firing off Kamehameha waves at me, but hey, in general, I thought this was a very cool fight, and not an easy one either. Sure, it moves fairly slowly and most of the attacks you understand fairly quickly, But when you get caught mid-combo or mess up some other way, it doesn't take much to take you down, while it has a massive health pool. A very cool detail with the design of Shara Ishvalda, aside from it generally being cool and its wings functioning almost more like tentacles or appendages, is that in the final phase, when it starts to open its eyes when it's near death, they are designed to always be looking directly at the camera. This gives it quite the unsettling and creepy aspect, which I thought was pretty cool and worth mentioning. And then, after finally beating Shara Ishvalda, the game is now done. Except it still isn't. That Ruiner Nergigante didn't drop any specific Ruiner Nergigante materials. You wanna know why? Because it's still alive and is the next big target. So I still can't upgrade my Obliteration's Footfall. It's so over, bros. Tracking Ruiner Nergigante down then leads you to an entirely new area, the Guiding Lands, which is essentially a mishmash of all of the other biomes in the game, housing every possible monster within it on rotation. This is essentially the true endgame of Monster Hunter World, and where you will be grinding a lot if you want to get all of the special stuff that's found here and finish up some gear sets and whatever. It has its own mechanics of area levels and investigations, and special materials found here you can use to further augment your gear, with this area essentially being a giant playground and the epitome of the gameplay loop of Monster Hunter World. It is essentially one giant endgame grind to increase area levels so stronger monsters start appearing, so you can hunt them down for their Guiding Lands materials, so you can augment your gear with the better materials. As you progress through this, you also continually keep building up your Hunter and Master rank, which at certain milestones unlock new quests to fight new monsters. Ruiner Nergigante is locked behind Master rank 99, for example, with other monsters like Zinogre and Rajang appearing and being unlocked as you go through the Guiding Lands and complete special assignments as well. I haven't managed to beat that Rajang yet though, bro is hopped up on something for real. And it is, at this point, the point I reached after more than 100 hours playing the game, on and off for a few months, that I would like to start drawing my conclusions. I was originally planning to maybe wait with making this video until I managed to beat Fatalis, which is the true end boss of the game. That would probably take a few more weeks of playing, rather a few more months, as I barely managed to survive for 2 minutes against Elatrion at this point, which I have to kill before I even get to attempt Fatalis. And I seriously doubt my overall opinions on the game will change by that point, unless I get so sick and tired of Guiding Lands grinding and going for the achievements that I start absolutely hating the game, which is a real possibility if I really commit to it, of course. So a few final thoughts in conclusion. Monster Hunter World, and including Iceborne, is a truly epic game. Just the concept of going around and hunting giant monsters in a relatively realistic setting is a ton of fun. I never got bored during my 100+ hours of gameplay up to this point. There's always something new around the corner, be it story progression, optional quest unlocks, or trying to get some specific materials for gear upgrades. The combat feels great and feels fresh as you keep trying out new weapons, and the few parts that did annoy me, like getting stunned or getting hit mid-combo, are largely either a skill issue on my part, or can be negated by equipping the appropriate gear and skills. Having now reached the end game, I am genuinely looking forward to facing off against the final few monsters and variants that will pose the biggest challenge yet, like a Furious Rajang, a Raging Brachydios, Fatalis, and I'm definitely going to try and beat at least Fatalis before I move on to Monster Hunter Rise later this year. I genuinely, truly fell in love with Monster Hunter. It gave and will continue to give me an experience I don't think I've ever seen in any other game I have ever played. Maybe it is because I've been sleeping on the Monster Hunter franchise up to this point, but this game actually just blew my socks off. I'm genuinely impressed. The gear progression system is second to none that I can think of. Every monster feels unique to fight. The game looks gorgeous and detailed, it just kind of has the entire package. The only part that actually might be a bit lacking is the actual story itself. Like, there's no real character development or whatever, you know, the story itself isn't that interesting, but I didn't actually care that much. Just give me new monsters to fight and I'm happy. Whether it's because they're a threat to the ecosystem or because they stole some kid's lollipop, I don't care. I want blood, and I want to break monster parts and slam their face with my hammer, and chop off their tails and carve up their warm bodies to fashion into epic gear. Like I said, I will definitely continue playing this game, and whenever I'm done with it, or am tired of it for some reason, I also plan to move on to Monster Hunter Rise and Sunbreak, which I'll try to finish before Wilds comes out next year, which I am now, of course, extremely excited about to see how they will try to top Monster Hunter World. So that's about it, I think. Thank you so very much for watching if you made it through the entire thing, and I hope you enjoyed the video and me essentially gushing over a 6-year-old game that will probably be obsolete by this time next year. Hopefully, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks again for watching. Peace out.